Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Katie VanBenschoten. I am an events director with the Foundation Fighting Blindness and based in New York City. I'm excited to be here with you today for our final Living and Thriving session titled Coping with Anxiety, Depression, and Stress related to vision loss or serving in a helper role. I would like to review some logistical details for this session. Today's session is being recorded and live streamed and available in closed captioning. To activate the closed captioning, please select closed captioning at the bottom of the interface. If you are using a screen reader, please be aware the controls are on the bottom of the Zoom interface. This control bar may collapse when not in use. If you prefer to prevent the controls from auto-hiding, go to Settings within the Zoom platform, select Accessibility, and then select Always Show Meeting Controls. All of the sessions during the conference are being recorded and will be available to view at a later date. Before we begin, I'd like to encourage you to be social with us. Share your Visions experience using the hashtag Visions2020 on Facebook and Twitter. The speaker for this session is Dr. Ann Wagner with moderator Eric Ringham. Dr. Ann Wagner is a board-certified clinical psychologist who has worked with the Minneapolis VA HCS for the past 23 years, serving veterans and their families. She works primarily on the PTSD clinical team, providing evidence-based assessments and interventions for PTSD and other trauma-related problems. Dr. Wagner herself is legally blind due to retinitis pigmentosa. Eric Ringham retired last month as a senior editor at Minnesota Public Radio News, where he supervised arts and education coverage. Before joining NPR staff in 2009, he completed almost 30 years at the Star Tribune in Minneapolis, serving most of that time as commentary editor. Mr. Ringham also works part-time as a voice and stage actor. He and his spouse, Ann Wagner, live in South Minneapolis. With that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Wagner and Mr. Ringham.
Hi. Thank you so much. We're just so happy to be here with all of you. And I have a few disclaimers as a federal employee. I do need to let you all know that the presentation today in no way reflects any official views of the Department of Veterans Affairs or the federal government. I am here primarily in my role as a citizen psychologist as well as a person with vision loss. I also just need to make it clear that I'm not entering into a professional mental health provider role with you today. I'm providing an educational workshop presentation that I hope at least some part of it will feel helpful to you. And we really welcome feedback at the end. So in terms of the presentation, it is meant to be as interactive as possible. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to hear voices. So the chat line is really going to be important at certain parts where I'm going to be asking for maybe some verbal responses. And there's some parts where I'm just going to be asking if something relates to you. And then you could just answer yes by clicking the raised hand icon or in the chat line writing Y or yes. And then Eric, who is serving as my kind of sighted helper, as well as doing some of the presentation, he'll be able to read those and kind of be your voice during the presentation. If at any time you can't hear us, please chat that. And I don't know what we can do to fix it, but we have a lot of tech support on the side. I do want to thank all of the Federation Fighting Blindness staff for all that you do, and really want to thank the coordinators of this Visions 2020. And if it's okay, I also want to thank our local Northern Lights chapter main kind of contact person, Julie Anderson. She's just a bundle of warmth and caring, and just want to say thank you. So.
Could I speak up for 1 second before we continue? I hope our technical colleagues are noticing that there are some comments from people who say they cannot see the speaker and are wondering if there's something that they need to know how to do, or if there's something that you can do to fix that. Thank you. Oh, we're good now. See, glad I could help.
Yay. Okay, good. I hope people have been able to hear me. Okay.
Yeah.
So I am going to ask Eric to just read the outline, kind of the main topics I hope to cover today. But no, they may end up being out of order because I sort of go with the flow also. So we'll see how it goes along. So
Sure.
good.
Well, first we're going to do introductions. That'll only take a minute. Then we're into pandemic-related heightening of isolation and effects. We'll talk about the distinction between natural emotional states and mental disorders. We'll do a little education about the function of emotions. We'll address some of the unique dilemmas that are facing people with vision loss and that are facing people who serve in a caring or helper role. We'll talk about social buffering theory, which we'll talk more about, but it has to do with coping with high levels of stress if we have adequate support. We will look into principles of acceptance, mindfulness of the present moment, what is, and in this moment you can claim your dignity and integrity and compassion. We'll address a few coping strategies, including deep breathing, calm mental imagery, humor, music, spiritual resources and practices, movement-based calming strategies like yoga and Tai Chi. We'll talk about mantras using your vocal cords. We'll talk about aromatherapy. I wanted to see how you sign aromatherapy. Thank you. We'll talk about smartphone apps that can help with stress management and with sleep. We will be emphasizing that self-care is a priority, and we'll talk about meditation stances of gratitude and compassion that have been found to be quite helpful. And then in the end, we'll have a final exercise where we do a little meditation work, and then we'll be open for questions and comments. That's what it looks like at the outset.
And just want to say, some of those coping resources are kind of just a list of things you can explore on your own. Some I'll say a little bit more in depth, but it's more just generating ideas. People could probably have many other ideas of what works to help cope. But I just wanted to have some of those ideas. The main focus is going to be on some of those earlier topics of understanding the role of emotions and some of the acceptance principles. So one of the first things I think, yeah, our background, introducing ourselves. So I just wanted to share a little bit about my personal background with RP. So what we've discovered in my family, the genetic transmission seems to be autosomal dominant, meaning if you have RP, any child you have will have a 50-50 chance of inheriting it, like flipping a coin. If you don't have RP, none of your children will inherit it. That's the way it's gone in my family. So my grandpa had 5 kids, and both sons and one of his daughters inherited the RP. The daughter was my mom, and she had 5 children. 4 of her 5 inherited the RP. So my nuclear family growing up was heavily loaded with people with blindness. My one sister, Becky, and my dad were the only sighted people in my immediate family. And I, as a child, when my vision was better, my vision met the standards for legal blindness due to the tunnel vision when I was 17. The night blindness was noticeable as early as I can remember. I had difficulty at night. But during the daytime, I would serve also as a sighted helper role with my mom a lot. So I feel like I kind of can speak of both roles. I do have to say, I think I feel a sense of gratitude in a way that I grew up in a family that felt like it understood like a blind culture. I had a lot of support. The sighted people in the family kind of knew what our special needs were. And I can't imagine what it would be like if I was the only one. And I know there's many people who've had that experience and feel even more of that loneliness and isolation. So I just want to validate that. I also want to say that I think my sister Becky, who was the only sighted child, I do believe her childhood was much more of a struggle than ours because I didn't know it then. But the main adults in our lives kept telling her that because she was blessed with with good eyes. Her responsibility was to be there for us. So she never really had a childhood where she could attend to her own wants or needs. And I didn't know any of that until my early 20s when she told me. So I have a lot of empathy for people who serve in the helper role. And we want to validate all the sorts of emotions that might show up for people in both roles, being somebody who's losing vision or lost vision, and people serving in that sighted helper role.
In my case, I've got very limited history of anything having to do with vision loss. I've got great eyes. I wear reading glasses. But my father, when he was about my age or just a little bit older, began to suffer from macular degeneration. And it hit him pretty hard. He started telling me ominously years ago that I was very likely to get it also, because macular degeneration tends to run in families. So I get my eyes checked regularly, but I'm told that I show no signs of either macular degeneration or glaucoma, from which he also suffered. However, being with him when he was functionally blind gave me some sense of blindness skills and etiquette and what to do and what not to do. And that was very helpful when I fell in love with Anne. So thanks to that experience with my dad, I knew some things about how to comport myself around a blind person, how to offer her my arm, how to not grab her arm, how to not steer her in directions she wasn't expecting to go, and to respect her independence as much as was possible.
Yeah.
So that's my story. It's I'm blessed with very good vision, and I get to do a lot of that helping role, but I object strenuously to use of the term caregiver, because that's not what I am at all. Thank you.
Okay, so I think I'm talking about ACT
Yes,
overview.
principles.
So I want to share that a lot of the education I'm going to be talking about or sharing today comes from a model of therapy. I'm actually trained in many different models of recovery, but one that I think does really a phenomenal job explaining the facts about emotions and helping us understand the ways we've been taught to struggle with emotional pain and then the negative effects of that, and that we can actually invite in a new relationship to our own emotions and learn that they show up to try to tell us what we care about. They're actually trying to honor our heart and our values. So that's the model. I just want to review some education with you today, and it's called Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, ACT. I also need to make it clear that I have no financial relationship with the developers of ACT. This is just a model in my work as a psychologist for many years. I've found to be transformative for many of the people I work with. And I myself use and follow these principles every day and find them helpful. So I'm really hoping you will as well, and interested in that feedback at the end. So if you are intrigued by what I'm going to be sharing, this is just going to be an overview. There are other resources for ACT available. There's a free ACT Coach app that many people I've worked with say they just love it. It has mindfulness exercises and kind of exercises to walk through some of the principles. There are also self-help books available that you can Google for ACT. And many of the veterans I've worked with have liked the happiness trap in particular. But again, I'm not advocating anything in particular. I'm just sharing some voices of some of the people I've worked with that they've found them very helpful. There's also a TED Talks by Stephen Hayes, who's the developer of ACT, on psychological flexibility that might be of interest. So just some other resources, but I'm going to be reviewing some of the main education today, as well as some interactive portions. So
another book is Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life.
yeah, it's a self-help book. Okay. And the next
First question, interactive exercise.
Okay, so one of the first questions I have where you're going to get to see if you can respond in your chat line or click that raised hand for a yes response is, if you are somebody with vision loss, have you ever experienced anxiety, depression, or distress at any time related to vision loss? And I'm waiting for responses.
And while we're waiting for those responses, we have a yes and a yes. Probably some more yeses coming, yes. We also have a question about,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
we'll leave that for later. Sorry. Yes, yes, yes. No, nobody has said no so far.
Okay.
And a lot of people are saying yes.
So, okay. And then for those of you serving in the helper role, have you ever experienced anxiety, depression, or distress related to serving in the helper role?
I just said yes.
And what are we seeing?
Yeah. Tabitha, Ethel, yes.
Lots of yeses?
Lots of
Yeah.
yeses.
Okay. Now, have you experienced an increase in your anxiety, depression, or distress of any kind since COVID started? And we're going to see what kind of responses we get. If it seems like those emotions seem to be higher.
We have a no from Derek.
Okay.
And another a little, and one not vision related. That's from Candy. A few other no's.
Okay.
Yes, confusion of info is from William.
Okay.
Sarah says no, staying home has relieved anxiety, actually.
Interesting.
And
I've heard.
Agreed, not vision related anxiety. That's from Miriam. Miriam. Somewhat, but it's different from the normal. I need an au pair, but can't get one anymore. That's from Kimberly. And Miriam agrees with Sarah. So, yep.
Okay.
And absolutely, that was
Yeah.
from.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, this go by so fast. That was from Laura.
So we're seeing a mix of responses. Some maybe, some not. And that certainly fits with the human experience of we all are all individuals. And I do also want to note that there has been some mention that for some people with vision loss, some of the things that came with COVID have contributed to some increase in feeling more isolated and more frustrated. But I'm also aware that Eric and I have had conversations where some new, out of adverse situations, sometimes positive things happen. So we've noticed some things to feel some gratitude for as well, that have opened up. Like our son, who lives in Chicago, came to shelter in place and work from our home for 3 months, and that would never have happened. Not that we're not close, but
we would not have lived with him.
Yeah, it wouldn't have happened. So there's these special areas of gratitude that have also opened up. But for those who have experienced an increase, we just want to make sure we're validating. And
Brent says, not vision related, but stupid people anxiety when I go out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. All the things we can't control. And we're going to be talking about the emotion of helplessness in a little bit, which kind of honors the truth that we can't control anything except our own actions in this one moment. But some of the things that we've reflected on in conversations that might be some of the reasons why people might be experiencing more isolation or distress.
Speaking of isolation, COVID has made many people and neighbors around me more open to ask me questions because they have for the first time experienced some isolation.
Yes. And that's actually one of the I love that. I love that there's something about this that's opening up people to be more curious and to reflect on their experiences. And I have noticed also that neighbors seem to be more outgoing opening up, asking if people need help, and we're outside more. There's a slowing down of society that many people have appreciated, even though not everybody has experienced that. So there's a mix of changes that have happened, and some may feel like positive openings that feel really special, and others may feel even more trying. I know for our local community, the Minneapolis and St. Paul, the metro transit, the buses and trains stopped running during some of the periods of social unrest related to the rioting and looting. So people who rely on public transportation had an additional barrier to access potential needed resources or work. There's some increased concerns about safety, being out and about, that may affect people with vision loss in different ways. And limited hours, again, for people who rely only on public transportation, that can be a significant added stressor.
Speaking of transportation, Mona says, I can attend more events now because they're live streamed and I don't have to worry about transportation.
Yes.
Vision related, as usually less people are in the grocery store early in the morning before COVID, but now there are more people in the grocery stores early in the morning. And that's being seconded from Marianne. Yeah.
Yes.
I think it's interesting how the social isolation thing, which is being taught to us now as a virtue and something that we should all practice, blind people are already isolated. They ought to get credit for time served.
Yeah. So I also have found these mediums, these Zoom platforms and online is so much more accessible. Church services for people who are previously like homebound, unable to get there for various reasons, or transportation barriers, are now able to link in and feel that sense of community. And this today, all of you who've linked in today, we're here as a community, right in our own, offices or homes, and it's just wonderful. So I'm what's the next part?
We could be moving into the distinction between natural emotions.
Yes. So I did want to speak just a little bit about the distinction between natural human emotions and actual mental disorders, mental health disorders or symptoms. So our natural human emotions of distress or helplessness, those are natural. They're not a symptom. And we're going to be talking about what they try to tell us about what we care about and the actual function of those, and how we can relate differently and more healthily to them. If you are wondering or feeling like the things you're experiencing seem to be impairing or really distressing, and wondering if you might actually have clinical depression, major depressive disorder, or an anxiety disorder, or anything that you're not sure but you feel it's impairing, I really encourage people, that's time to seek out mental health care for evaluation and kind of professional treatment planning. And I just hope people have access to that. And if you're not sure where to go, if that's something new for you to consider, checking with if you have insurance, checking with your primary care doctor who may know how to link you. If you don't have insurance, calling county social services and asking about mental health resources might be helpful. And even checking in with your state services for the blind and visually impaired. They may often know about mental health resources. Just ask and try to seek out questions and resources. Googling, thank goodness for the internet, although there may be a lot of misinformation out there, trying to find reputable sources to Google and learn more about symptoms or possible disorders and potentially helpful resources. If you have struggled at all with thoughts of self-harm or suicidal thoughts, those are kind of a sign that you need more support, and that's important to listen to. So please, if risk seems imminent, please call 911, seek support, call a friend. Don't stay alone if at all possible. Have somebody with you and seek support. So I just wanted to say that. So now,
into naming emotions.
all right, so
What does ACT stand for again?
acceptance and commitment therapy. And the acceptance part, we're going to be talking about how to relate differently to our uncomfortable emotions instead of struggling with them, learning how to actually invite in acceptance and willingness to feel in the moment what's showing up. So there's a lot of acceptance kind of education and principles. And then commitment therapy is about stepping into our values and kind of claiming our dignity and doing in the moment what you most approve of for who you want to be and what you want to be. So being mindful of values is part of the commitment principles. So we're going to start off just talking about emotions. And if you think about our emotions, it's usually not the positive ones or even the neutral ones that we struggle with. And if you think about, so it's usually the negative or more uncomfortable ones we struggle with. And we also have thoughts and memories, painful thoughts and memories that may show up. And we call all of those things private experiences. Those are things that show up inside us. And if the painful memories and thoughts didn't also show up with the negative emotions, because they do, there's these complex neuronal pathways in our brain that with every memory, every thought, there's going to be emotions probably showing up too. And if we probably wouldn't struggle so much with the painful thoughts and memories if it weren't for the negative emotions showing up with them. So really the core of our struggle is usually with the emotions, these negative or uncomfortable emotions. So I want to just start here with having you name through your chat line, names of some of the more uncomfortable emotions. So feeling names that you've struggled with, that you wish would stop showing up, or that you've tried to avoid if you could. So we're just going to want to get some emotion names out there. Like I've already named anxiety and depression, but what are some others?
Hopeless.
Hopelessness.
Fear of the unknown, fear and lack of confidence, shame, envy, frustration, embarrassment.
Excellent.
Sadness.
Yes.
Insecurity.
Yes.
Feeling defeated.
Yes.
Empty.
Yes.
Guilt, frustrated, loss of purpose. Angry, uncertainty, annoyance. Loss of freedom.
Yeah, feeling trapped.
Lack of self-worth. Fear. Dependent. Concern about losing my future. Exclusion. Anger. Ghost, invisible.
Mm-hmm.
Sadness. It's kind of like watching microwave popcorn. Okay, fear of future, grief, being left behind, self-consternation,
Yeah.
appreciative of seeing what I can, apprehension, deep fear, losing sight little by little, worrying about not being able to see my children,
Mm-hmm.
feeling left behind, insecurity and defense mechanisms that push others away,
Yes.
gratitude. Redenbacher, salted with butter.
Yeah.
Exclusion from some activities.
You've done an incredible job with your insight into your emotional world and being able to name these emotions. And helplessness, I'm just going to do some education about a few particular emotions. So all emotions actually show up to try to tell us what we care about. That's part of the education, and I'll talk more about that as we go along. But there's two emotions in particular I'd like to give some education about, and one is helplessness. So that's usually the name for the emotion that shows up when we cannot control something we really wish we could in this one moment. So helplessness. It's actually the most frequent of all the emotions because it actually tends to show up with all of the other negative emotions. So something uncomfortable showing up, and in this moment, we kind of wish, oh, I wish I wasn't feeling this pain. And we cannot undo that reality. We can't control it. If it's here, it's here. So there's the helplessness too, trying to show us and tell us we cannot control what shows up. So that's why it's the most frequent. It tends to show up with all the other ones too, because we tend to not want those other ones there. But we're going to be talking about how emotions show up to tell us what we care about. So helplessness, even though it's probably the emotion we struggle with the most, it's actually one of the most important ones for us to learn to respect and listen to what it's trying to tell us, because it tells us two truths. So this ACT model, ACT, is all about grounding with truth and reality. So we're just kind of trying to connect to something that's a truth. So helplessness is trying to tell you two truths. One is the limits of your control. It's trying to tell you that you have control over only one thing in life, and that's what you choose to say or do in this one moment right now. That's all we have any control over. So you have zero control over everything else. We cannot control anything from the past because we don't have a time machine. Even 2 seconds ago, we cannot control it. We cannot control the future. Same reason, we don't have a time machine. We cannot control what other people say, what they do, what they feel, and what they believe. We have zero control over that. And relationships tend to be the predominant source for emotion showing up because of that truth, that we have zero control over what people say, what they do, what they feel, what they believe. Zero control. So helplessness is going to show up hundreds, if not thousands of times every day because of all the things we can't control. It's showing up just to try to tell you that truth. And the second truth it's trying to tell you is that you care about something. There's something here that you care about. Otherwise, it doesn't show up. Okay, so it's really trying to tell you that truth. It's something you care about. And when we can connect to our heart and learn to speak from that, like, I know I can't control what you believe or what you're feeling here, and I care because you matter to me, and so I'm feeling this helplessness. Of course it's showing up. It's trying to tell me these truths. And we can center with that and work on acceptance instead of struggling with it, which is usually what we've been programmed to do. We've been programmed to struggle with helplessness. We don't like it. And yet part of recovery or part of entering into maybe inviting in more healthier practices is learning how to relate to this emotion differently. So that's helplessness. The other emotion I like to do education about is anger, because anger is a really fascinating emotion, but it often shows up as a defense or an avoidance of something deeper that may feel more painful. So it's kind of like a guard or a sentry in front of a fortress, but the fortress is actually your core truth, your real emotions, the core emotions. So the way the anger functions as this kind of avoidance is that every emotion we feel has an action urge associated with it, or sometimes multiple ones. The action itself would be a separate step, but the urge itself that shows up inside is kind of like this biologically programmed urge. So for anger, the urge is to attack, and it gives us an illusion of control. Okay, so that's how it's functioning, is kind of to help us not feel a deeper, more painful emotion. And 3 of the more common emotions, it can be any, but 3 of the more common, deeper emotions, almost always there's helplessness. There's something we can't control that we wish we could in this one moment. Hurt and fear seem to be really common emotions that the anger is showing up to try to help us not feel, and yet they're the true emotion from our heart that are trying to tell us what we care about. And so the anger, for people who have patterns of acting on the anger, which may not fit with their values at all, people going through anger management often are kind of taught to learn to recognize when the anger is showing up, understanding it's serving this kind of defense role, and to kind of give it permission to say, you know what, I don't need you to protect me from my real emotions that are simply trying to tell me what I care about. So, but anger's just, it's a really kind of fascinating emotion. So, so we have all these emotions that are showing up. Every single one is actually the truth of it. It's trying to tell us what we care about. Grief and loss, those are simply trying to tell you that you really cared about an attachment to someone or something. We get attached, we form attachments to ideas. We form attachments to our own physical abilities. So when we experience a progressive loss of our own abilities, we are going to grieve. And that's a core human emotion that's simply trying to tell you, you cared. You care about your body's functioning. And of course, it's a loss and it's sad when things decline. It's just trying to honor what you care about. Or if you've lost somebody you love or care about, it's really trying to honor that attachment. They meant something to you. They're in your heart. So grief and loss, like all the other emotions, have these natural urges. For grief and loss, it may be to cry. That may be a healthy expression. It may be to seek support and share the meaning or share with somebody. So every emotion has its function that's meaningful and important. So there's a couple other emotions that I just want to touch base on. Stress. How many people have you felt stress? I think it's universal. And feeling overwhelmed at times.
For a bunch of raised hands.
Yeah. Those emotions are actually trying to tell you about a dilemma. So I tend to define a dilemma as, in this moment, multiple values could be called into play. Multiple options for your actions that would all be important to you, and yet we can only do one thing at a time in the moment. And if we're lucky, there's a way to problem solve a win-win, where, oh, maybe I can do this and it'll meet at least two of these values. But oftentimes there simply is no win-win. We just have to pick and know at least we're honoring one value, but it does mean in this moment we are not attending to these other ones, and we are going to have emotions about that. And that's healthy and that's real, and it honors that many things are important to you. So stress and overwhelm are emotions that are simply showing up to tell you you care about a lot of things. And we can actually learn to note that and notice it in the moment, like, oh, okay. And take that deep breath and say, you know, I'm grateful I care about a lot of things, that honors the complexity of this human being that I am. And I'm gonna listen to the helplessness here, which is also showing up with those emotions, because it's trying to tell you the truth. You can only do one thing. I'm gonna listen to that, and I'm gonna focus on just doing one thing, and knowing with time I will do my best to attend to the other things. And I'm gonna grieve what I'm not able to attend to. That's also important. So I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about some unique dilemmas that may face people who have vision loss, and that may be facing people who serve in this helper role, just to kind of personalize, even though there's an infinite amount of other dilemmas unrelated to vision loss or serving in a helper role that we face probably every day. But there's a few that I was able to kind of problem solve, and Eric, or not problem solve, but just gain insight into the dilemmas we may face. So I'm going to share some of those. And then you can be thinking about what are some moments related to vision loss or serving in a helper role that feel like a dilemma, like, there's something here I care about, but this is something else I care about and I can't do both. So some that I'm aware of that I'm curious to see if these relate to anybody else is a dilemma for a person with vision loss is the times where you want help, you need help, it's not something you do independently, and you know you kind of want it right now. That's a value. and here's your help, your person who's been helping, and you also value his time or her time and what's important to them for their day, and you don't want to feel like you're imposing your need over theirs. And so there's that dilemma. There's the other dilemma of when they I'm thinking about one that's more on your end, so I'm trying to think of.
Leave the outline if you want to. That's fine.
That's okay. But the other dilemma that I've faced is there's times where I think if I went to rehab, and I know there are many resources here in the metro area, that I could learn other skills. I'm not the most skilled for dealing with some of the limitations for my vision loss. And I could go to rehab and learn those skills and be even more independent than what I am. But the dilemma is the time that would take, the resources it would take, and I have all these other values I'm trying to balance. And so far, I'm siding with all these other values of how I'm trying to balance my days, and I haven't done that. But it is a dilemma, I feel, because that would be important too, to learn how to be even more independent. So what were some of the other ones I listed for vision loss?
That the helper may prefer to help in some ways, such as ensuring the safety of a woman using public transit.
Yeah. So me as a person with vision loss, as a woman, even if I wanted to honor a value of independence to go out at night using public transit, there might be safety issues for being a woman. And so the helper may say, no, I'd rather take you because we both value my safety, but that's still kind of a dilemma. And then there's the dilemma of, I used to use Metro Mobility for years, and I accepted that sometimes there's an hour wait. I may not get where I need to in a timely manner, especially in the winter. And I tried to accommodate that with my time. But then Eric, when we started dating, now what, 10 years ago, he just said, no, let me take you to your appointments. And that was so much easier, and it seemed to be meaningful to him. So I accepted that.
I was not secretly trying to undermine your independence.
I know. So, but that's a dilemma of the independence and the resources available to me, and then his loving offer that I accepted. But then what are some of the dilemmas
for the helpers? Okay, so you might want to help the person with vision loss, but you may have other plans for that moment, so you feel guilty if you say, can I help you later? Or even if you might conceivably say no. I'm not going to respond to these individually. Another one is that you might feel like a martyr if you put the person with the vision loss's needs consistently above your own needs, therefore opening up a place for resentment to build. Or the helper offering to help when the person with vision loss hasn't asked to be helped, and so the helper feels rejected or hurt if the offer is declined. This one's mine, kind of. And the dilemma is that the helper also wants to support the person with vision loss being self-sufficient. So yeah, I mean, I was joking sort of a minute ago when I said I'm not secretly trying to undercut your independence, but as I've said over and over again, if you say that you're thirsty, I'm going to offer you a glass of water. I know you can get the water yourself, but it's just in my nature to help that way. I'm trying to think what some other examples are. One time when we had a little bit of stress between us, and I was out talking to a friend of mine, kind of a wise person I go to for advice. And he asked what was up, and I said, things are a little stressful at home. And he said, why? And I said, well, I keep offering to help. And he said, oh, dude. I think thank you, Scott. Scott says I'm being loving and romantic. And that's how I feel. But the fact is that there are times when I really need to restrain myself and not offer something that hasn't been asked for. Anne has been living with blindness and semi-blindness for most of her life, and it's not I need to accept that she probably has a plan for how she's going to navigate through this particular thicket, and that I need to respect that it's annoying to have somebody jump in and help when you haven't asked for help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the dilemma here is, oh my gosh, I know he's doing it from a moment of loving kindness, and he's an amazing partner. And yet this thing shows up in me like, I was gonna do it myself. I can do it myself. Duh. And then what makes it even more complicated is the times where I'm really grateful that he offered, because I didn't think to ask, you know, so that makes it even more complicated. The poor guy, how can he know? So I end up reinforcing it a lot of the times where he offers to help, and I'm like, sure, thank you. Yeah. So we do the best we can.
Another way in which we're slightly out of sync is that Anne and I have different personality types, and she really does care about details and taking care of every last jot and tittle of every task.
Type A.
She's type A. I'm whatever type it is that isn't like that.
Type B.
Okay, I'm type B.
Yeah.
And I do have a sense, and this comes from years of working in journalism, I think, that you sort of perform triage over the course of the day. This needs to be dealt with today, so I'm going to deal with that. These other things, you can let them go, let them slide for a while, or not, or just kind of right around that one. But Anne is not like that at all. So I will let something slide a little bit. And Anne's, unfortunately, it might be something that only I can do, that would take her hours and hours with her assistive technology to do. It's much easier to ask me to do it. It's much easier for me to do it, but I don't think it needs to be done. So that creates another kind of stress that I think we don't really need to spend time on that right now, do we? And Anne's answer is sometimes, yeah, we kind of do. And then we have to navigate that.
Yeah.
We laugh a lot, fortunately.
We do, and that's something I really, even though we're going to be talking about kind of the emotional pain that can show up related to vision loss, helper role, or all the other things in our lives, and how to kind of cope and maybe relate to that differently, I do want to acknowledge that there are some incredibly positive, I feel bold saying this, but the blindness has been an agent at times for incredible laughter, where we have tears coming out of our eyes. We are laughing so hard about the funny things that happen. And often they come out of a moment of stress. Like when we used to both go to the grocery store. Since COVID, he's the one who goes now. But you went, you have a memory?
No, go ahead.
No, go ahead. What?
Well, sometimes there's a particularly specific thing that Anne wants to buy at the grocery store. I would never think of, A, I don't know what that's used for. B, I don't know why anybody would ever want it. C, my good enough attitude tends to let me, substitute kind of freely. If I think this would be about as good as that, I'll get this because I know where this is. I can find it. And we'll be walking through the store, and she'll name a particular thing that she wants, like her nieces and nephews prefer a certain brand of gummies. And I think gummies are gummies. No, they're not.
No,
not in her.
Because of my value of love for them, I want to get them what I know they like.
Right.
But anyway, okay.
So, so I'll find 3 kinds that are not the right kind. And when she says, no, we have to keep looking for the other kind, I just want to, I slap my forehead.
And so here's another dilemma there. In that moment, I know this is trying his natural way of being, because it is good enough, and I respect that. And I've offered to him, if there's times where I've gotten a sighted helper of a store clerk with my list, and we don't have any of this tension. They're happy to help me find what I need or I want. And there's a freedom in that. And I've offered, if it gets to be this much of a struggle with us, to help me get what I want, because if I could see, I could find and get what I want. And I think I have a right to seek what I want. And of course I do.
Of course you do.
And I need to respect that sometimes good enough is good enough. And I have, without you knowing it, there has been many times where I have said, fine, even though it wasn't quite what I wanted. So I'm trying to work with him too, but he has decided he would rather be my helper in the grocery store than have me get somebody else. So we negotiate every person and their helper. The answer to these dilemmas is complex, but the core of it is communication and openness and sharing when somebody's feeling, I'm feeling a little frustrated here in the helplessness. And just being mindful of wanting the stance of supporting. Like, I work better with these conflicts and these dilemmas with him when I try to invite in being mindful of his life. He's on his own path, his journey, and we've chosen to share our lives, but this is his, and he has his own hopes and dreams and ways of navigating and how he wants to spend his moments. And I want to support him. That's the kind of partner I want to be. I want him to have as much as he can of what he wants. And I know he does the same for me. And that's what works and helps us get through these conflict times. And of course, inviting in humor helps a lot. We have found our own ways when the tension's really high to kind of claim that we are more important than the conflict or whatever's happening. And I don't know, are we bold enough to share what we do?
You've come this far.
Okay. So one of us will say, okay, I'm about to push you up against the wall. We would never do it without that disclaimer. And even though we both may have our faces in this kind of muteness, how you get sometimes when you're feeling really hurt or frustrated. And once we're up and we just hold each other cheek to cheek until we calm down and we come together. So that's what works for us, as well as just starting to giggle and laugh about the conflict, about how we get. For some reason that triggers giggles, particularly for me, and then he'll follow along. Yeah. So humor, it helps, but communication and really trying to respect that this other person also has hopes and dreams and needs and ideas for how they want to spend their time. So it invites in more of a collaboration or a negotiation. And again, I know I'm oversimplifying. These are very complex moments with these dilemmas. But please know, whatever's showing up is trying to tell you that you care about something. That's the function of these emotions. So now I'd like to shift to talking about what are some of the ways we have been taught to struggle with these emotions. So societal messages, since we were little itty bitty kids, we have been taught to judge our uncomfortable emotions as bad and toxic through messages like, stop crying, there's nothing to cry about. Right there, as itty bitty people starting to learn language and the meaning, we're experiencing a big person with a stern voice that sounds rejecting, saying, I'm not supposed to feel what I feel, and I'm certainly not supposed to express it. So right there, we're told it's not okay to feel what we feel, and we're given a message that we're supposed to be able to control it. Stop crying. So we learn the earliest form of avoidance, suppression. We learn to swallow our emotions, but they're still there. And then we're praised. Oh, what a big girl, what a big boy. We're modeled it through other judgments. We look around and see that the big people in our life, they're not, boy, daddy doesn't seem scared or mommy doesn't seem scared, and yet I'm feeling scared, and I've already learned enough from societal messages that if I don't match the appearance of how other people seem to be, I'm going to be rejected, and I'm going to feel like I'm not okay, I'm not good enough to be accepted. So we start to internalize these judgments, and it's all about emotions and how we've been taught to relate to them. So we've been taught to judge our own natural human emotions as bad, as toxic, as something we're supposed to be able to get rid of. And yet none of that is true. None of it. Emotions show up, they're triggered, we cannot control them, and they only show up to tell us what we care about. But we've been taught to judge them, so we've learned all sorts of ways to struggle with them, to try to feel better, to not have them. So now I am going to invite you to, on your chat, what are some of the ways you try to get rid of or avoid the uncomfortable emotions? And these tend to usually be like avoidance type behaviors, like isolating. But I'm curious, I can offer some, but we'll see what people chat.
Candy says, when I was younger, I was told that I should do things rather than be given the choice of could, which gives a choice. Should implies I'm doing it wrong.
Yes.
Given the above, I try to give myself choices rather than absolutes.
Love it.
Susie says, withdrawal. Rhonda
Yes.
says, overeating. Brent says, oh, Brent was, I think, privately to me. Beer with sighted friends. That's from Tim. Caitlin says, defensive talk, resentment.
Yes.
Marion says, I just say stop. Susie also says overeating. Derek says, a cold beer, kind of just bottle it in.
Mm-hmm.
Bury myself in work and achievement.
Workaholic, yes.
Mask emotions. Focus on work 100% to the point where you're not letting yourself feel.
Yes.
Breathe. Try to think how the situation looks from another person's perspective.
So we have, thank you so much. There are many ways we respond to this struggle that can feel helpful and value consistent for many people, thinking about a different perspective or how some people may have it worse. That can actually feel kind of centering and aligning with our value of compassion for others, and it can kind of help give us some kind of energy to cope. At times, there's a subtle function there that it can function as a form of minimization, which is an avoidance kind of behavior, kind of minimizing our own pain. So I'm just going to name that in case that's a potential function. And part of this workshop is to help people gain insight into the many ways we might struggle with our own painful emotions that seem more subtle and some more clear. So some of the main kinds are isolation, withdrawal. If I don't answer the phone or if I stay by myself, then maybe I won't feel the emotional pain. The suppression, the burying it, the denying it, the overeating as a way to distract and self-soothe. There are many distractions we do that are functioning as avoidance of our own emotions, like watching TV for hours and hours, or the internet, the computer, hobbies. If hobbies are, you're the only one who can determine if the amount you're engaging in hobbies fits with your balance and how you want to balance your life. But for a lot of people, they're when they look at it, they're spending hours and hours doing their hobbies, and it's functioning as actually trying to avoid their own core emotions. It's not necessarily that they value doing it for hours. So starting to kind of look at the choices we make in the moment, and do they reflect what we value, or are they in some way functioning as this avoidance function? So we have people may stay a lot of times in bed. Some people develop an invisible wall or a guard up because of past pain at feeling rejected or invalidated or not seen. So you've just learned to become an island, and that's a real effect in relationships, and it's really painful and lonely. The workaholic is a very common type of avoidance, to focus on work. It's kind of that distraction. And I think there's a main category. The intellectualization. Learning to hang out in our heads, neglecting our emotional world. And yet our core, the core of our being, is much more actually of an emotional world. Our minds have absorbed so many words and ideas from language that are judgment-based. We've been taught more judgments, and now there are neuronal pathways floating around, and we can't undo that. We're going to have those judgments chatter at us, but there's no truth or reality in any judgmental thought. There's actually no such thing as good or bad, right or wrong, better than, less than. And certainly no truth in I'm not good enough or I'm worthless. And so many people, they can trace back as early as they can remember those feelings because of messages from society, these judgments. And it's the judgments and the struggle with our emotional pain that cause the problems. The emotions themselves are actually trying to tell us what we care about. So we have all these judgments programmed, and we can learn to observe them and not buy them and recognize they are not fact-based or truth-based. And the way we can know that, well, I'm giving you the education. There's no truth in a judgment. But we can't cut somebody open and see bad or good. I can say this is a bad table, no such thing. Or I could say it's a good table, no such thing. You can't cut it open and see it. Our experience in the present moment with what is going to be our truth and our facts and our reality. And it's just our experience of it. How do we feel it? How do we notice it? What is it? That's it. So for us, you are a human being. I'm noticing the facts. You are a human being who cares deeply about the things you care about. You feel the wanting for the things you want, and you may choose collaboration or negotiation with other people for the things that they want. People want what they want. We cannot control that. And to judge them for it has no basis in fact or reality. We can't control what we feel. We feel what we feel. It shows up. Despite all these things we've been taught to do with the struggle, all these avoidance hanging out in our head, that intellectualization, our emotional world is still there. We can deny it, and it's there, and it deserves our respect, and it deserves our self-compassion. But there's another thing, another type of avoidance we do, rumination. Holy cow, do we spend a lot of time ruminating in our head? And I think several of you noted it. When we spend time in our head with the if only ... or if only ... the what ifs, what if ... and we get into these fantasies, these ideas, and we get connected to them and attached to them. And meanwhile, we're still neglecting the core real emotion that's probably hurt and helplessness at whatever it is that happened. And the should thoughts. I think a couple of people mentioned that. Should thoughts do so much damage if we fuse with them. Things should be different than what they are. Things should be different than what they are. And we stay up at that should level, which is the fantasy that gives us that illusion of control so we don't feel so helpless. And yet the last part, what they are, is our truth. Things are what they are in this moment. And what is it I value? How do I want to be? To help determine the action, because even though we are helpless to control everything else, remember from the beginning, you do have control over one thing, and that's what you choose to say or do. So here's what's called a dialectic, a multiple truth thing. Even though we can feel helplessness 1,000 times a day, you are not helpless. You are in control of your actions in this one moment. And the more we can have those actions fit our values, that's considered healthier, that's quality of life, even if we don't get the outcomes we want, because we can't control outcomes either. We are helpless to control outcomes, only our own actions in this one moment. And what I'm going to be inviting people to do is to shift from this adversarial relationship we've been taught with our own emotional pain to learn to validate it and start to notice what your core feelings are trying to tell you about your own values and what you care about, because that's why they show up. So before we talk a little bit more about what they might be telling you, and Eric, if you can remind me, I really want to come back to the emotion of hurt and talk about that.
Okay.
In a bit. But now I just like to talk about what are some of the negative effects of all these avoidance behaviors. Spending time ruminating, isolating. What areas of your life might be negatively affected by these actual avoidance behaviors, such as like relationships. So I want to see what people might say for awareness of what ends up affecting negatively because of the avoidance or struggle behaviors you've been doing. What do we see?
Unable to care about what other people are needing, having fun, losing friends, gut ache, literally.
Yes.
Relationships. Justice is a human concept that does not occur in nature. Holy cow, indeed. Ruminating.
Yeah.
Being in the moment. Enjoyable experiences. Having a social life. Self-esteem.
Yes. Can I, before you go on, I just want to say, absolutely, and I use a definition of self-esteem or self-respect. is there's a core part of us that knows in the moment whether you approve of an action you took or not. So in the moment, if you're engaging in this struggle behaviors of isolating, not seeking out support and caring the way you deep down value doing, those are moments of lower self-esteem or self-respect. And then the part of us that knows when we do approve of what we're doing, in those moments, our self-esteem is intact. So
I want to back up just a minute to point out that Monique said, this is a few minutes ago, but I am always judging / comparing my past better vision self with my present low vision self.
yes, our mind, such a good point. Our mind is a chatterbox, and it has been programmed because of all the societal messages. We've heard it everywhere. People are comparing, but things used to be this way. We have been taught to have that kind of frame of comparison. So our mind is going to compare to the past when things function better. And in this moment, what's going to show up is grief. Grief. Because of that comparison. It's a natural human emotion that shows up when our mind is doing that comparison thing. And it's simply saying that, of course, you valued what you were able to do when you had better vision back then. And it's a loss and all the things you've lost. So you have this moment to be with that loss, to comfort it, to grieve it, because it is something you care about. And then instead of suppressing it through avoidance and rumination with it, which is taking up moments of your life now that you may want to claim in a different way, once you've been able to accept and allow for that grief and loss because the mind gave you that thought of the comparison, then the mindfulness and acceptance part of this is to know what I call the beginner's mind is a mindfulness stance. There are many. If I were born today, and this was just the way my eyes worked, my body worked, my relationship worked, what would I do right now to honor my values? Or if I'm in a dilemma state, what choice would I make doing the best I can to respect this dilemma if I were born today and this was just the way it is? It's a way that helps us come into the moment with what is. And yes, our mind is still going to keep giving us that comparison pathway because it's been taught to do that. And we're going to grieve. And it's really important to allow that space because it is honoring your heart of what you cared about. And it's a real thing. We get to grieve. And we get to claim our moments today and try to hold that head up with dignity and say, I approve of the choices I'm making now in the context of what is. And it's not easy. So you all have listed so many of the negative effects of the struggle behaviors themselves, the avoidance. Relationships suffer, physical health suffers, our self-esteem can suffer. We can actually, many people say they actually have even higher levels of anxiety and depression because of all the avoidance and struggle. Work, who knows, that may suffer. Therefore, financial resources could, because of all the struggle behaviors that we've been taught to do. Some of the other avoidance patterns are alcohol and drugs. Very common function of that is about trying to suppress and not feel what we feel. And there can be many effects of that alone, including affects physical health, mental functioning, our brain health can be affected, injuries, self-harm, so many negative effects that come from the struggle. So 3 questions here to point out the truth, because ACT, this model, is all about noticing the truth of how things really work. So we've just done an experiential sort of exercise to get to the truth here, to stand against some of the automatic programming we've been taught or the chatter. And the first question is, have any of you stopped feeling painful emotions? We're probably going to see a lot of no's. It hasn't stopped. So that's fact number 1. It is actually impossible to not feel what we feel.
We have a couple of no's. I want to point out that Brent says bipolar 2 and adult ADD make it even harder for me personally. Alcoholism exposed itself and 4 years sober now. Way to go, Brent.
Yeah.
Alan, Monique, and both Alan and Monique both say no. Brent says the pain is always there.
Yes.
Elizabeth says no.
Okay.
Cynthia says now was numb for several years,
Yeah.
or no was numb for several
Yes.
years.
Numbing, by the way, is an emotional state too, and it often is a function like anger as a defense, but it is an actual emotional state of numbness. So I just want to name that. But what I want to just note, so fact number one, it is actually truly impossible, and this is a fact, it is impossible to control our private experiences. Our emotions get triggered, just like positive ones. If they happen to show up, they're triggered by something. Negative emotions get triggered, and often what's showing up is something from the past. A lot of times it is the present, and a lot of times it's a bit of both. And it's important to understand and relate to your emotional world to kind of get a sense if your response in the moment seems a little bit out of proportion to the present, then it is absolutely safe to assume something's coming up from the past, that pain. And we don't even have to know exactly what it's related to be able to validate, yeah, something else is showing up here from the past. So
Tim says, can I interrupt? Tim says, I don't allow myself to feel, but I know I need to cry with grief, but I haven't cried in many, many years.
yes, such insight. I want to commend you that your core knows. If we can learn to listen to our core, it knows what we need for healing and recovery. So you've tapped in, you're listening, you need to cry. That's a natural, healthy human expression. And some of societal programming, particularly for men, but many women in their backgrounds have been taught that it's simply not okay to cry, that it's, quote, a sign of weakness, you're going to be rejected. All of that, those are judgments, and there's no truth in any of it. And it's really hard to defy or stand against that programming. But what I'm going to encourage all of you to do is try to connect with your core. It knows its truth, and it knows what you need for healing. And crying is, and I really commend you for your insight. That is something that would probably be very, very helpful. So fact number one, we cannot control our emotions. They're going to show up. Fact number two is none of the emotions themselves cause any of the negative effects of the avoidance. So let's say we had all those emotions kind of floating up on top in a room. They're all up there, all of our natural human emotions. And under them, we had all these struggle behaviors that we've done, the isolation, the alcohol use, the rumination, the suppressing, the bearing it, all those are under it. And then under those struggle behaviors are all these negative effects of impaired relationships, you not living your values, feeling more lonely, perhaps more depressed. Things aren't working, life is out of balance, quality of life is out of balance. All of those bottom layer negative effects come only from the struggle behaviors, the avoidance. They do not come from the emotions at the top in the room. We can eliminate all those negative effects by simply choosing willingness to hear and be with the emotions that are at the top of the room. So when we can be with them and we can invite them fully to be with them and connect with them compassionately, then we get to see that things open up, because it means you're going to be doing what you value then. You're going to choose willingness to feel emotional discomfort in the service of reaching out, to stand against that invisible wall, to cry, because every tear is trying to tell you about your heart. And it's trying to tell you that in that moment, you are actually, you're connecting with your friend, with your core, like it's a beloved best friend. And it's been feeling lonely. It's been feeling so lonely for so long because of the societal programming. So I want to make it very clear, there's no blame here, because blame would be a judgment, and there's no truth in that anyway. We've been taught all of these struggle behaviors. We've all been taught them. And all we can do in the moment is try to claim our values and accept what we feel, choose willingness to allow it, And a bit of self-compassion and validation is kind of healing. So fact one, we cannot control what we feel. They're natural. They're part of being human. Our emotions, the positive, neutral, and negative, they are natural. The second fact, the emotions themselves do not cause any of those negative effects. They come only from the struggle behavior. That's it. And we can actually do something about that. Fact three, if we noticed as we talked about it, some of you acknowledged increased depression. The struggle behaviors actually contribute to the very thing you've been trying to not feel, anxiety, discomfort. The more we struggle with it, the more we suffer. We have increased emotional distress. So it's a mental health rule. The more unwilling we are to have something of a private nature, one of our private experiences, the more we've got it. It's bigger. So the more afraid you are of feeling fear, you're gonna be afraid all the time. You're gonna be constant, like, what's gonna trigger fear? Oh my gosh, can't have it. Fear's there all the time. Versus willingness to understand if fear shows up, it's gonna be trying to tell me that I care about something. It's gonna be trying to tell me that either I care about my own safety, if it's that kind of fear, or it's gonna be fear that's telling me I care about access to the things that are important to me, or to my health and well-being. It's trying to communicate something important. So I'm going to choose willingness when it shows up. I'm going to try to listen to what it's telling me. So
You wanted me to remind you.
about hurt?
Hurt.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to. So hurt, many people who've had experiences where other people in their lives have been invalidating or abusive, start to internalize the message that somehow I'm not good enough. And they feel like that hurt feeling is somehow reinforcing that idea. But actually, if we can learn to understand what hurt is telling us, say somebody has just said something judgmental that their mind gave them, they chose to speak it, and they put it at your feet, and it's about you. Something judgmental and painful. And you feel that hurt, and you feel that helplessness. The helplessness, again, is trying to tell you that you can't control what this other person did, and it's trying to tell you that you care about something, and that's where we get to listen to the hurt. The hurt is actually trying to tell you something that's a core truth, that deep down your self-respect is completely intact. Your core knows you did not deserve that judgment. Your core knows there's no truth in it. It doesn't fit. And the hurt is actually trying to validate that for you, that what this person is putting out is not you, was never you, and you feel hurt. So it's really, really important to validate when the hurt shows up, when we feel that we've been invalidated or judged in some way that doesn't fit with our truth, to acknowledge it and to kind of comfort it and recognize that it's trying to tell you something about your own heart and about your own self-awareness. You've always, always been worthy of loving kindness in this world. We all are. And we know that life doesn't give us those experiences. We know that our systems do not support marginalized peoples. Hopefully someday things will change, and many things have over the years. And in this moment, you get to stand with your dignity and integrity and head held high and know that the hurt feeling is affirming you are whole. You have everything you need in you. Yep. So what I want to talk about is the relationship, to shift from this adversarial relationship to one of acceptance and willingness. So the acceptance and willingness concepts are about, in this moment, becoming aware of what's showing up, learning to observe the chatter, the words that our mind chatters at us, and realize we can't control that either. Once a neuronal pathway is formed with judgmental thoughts, they're going to chatter at us. But we can learn to be really skillful at observing, what is the mind chattering? What words? Okay, they're just words, and most of them are judgments. There's no truth or reality. What does my experience say in this moment? oh, I'm feeling these emotions. Do they feel like they're about the present or maybe something older about the past? Maybe I'll take a moment to have some compassion for them, to comfort them instead of rejecting them. Because again, they're lonely. They've been lonely for a long time. And you are in a position to be able to validate and accept. That's the acceptance part. Choosing willingness to feel what we feel. And then think, what would I approve of doing? What would really fit with how I most want to be and what I would value doing in this moment? Even with fear, even with anxiety present, we can step into those moments if it's valued. Okay, we can do what we value if it's physically possible. There are real barriers, we know. Some people will say, I value physical exercise, but they may have a broken leg, so they're not able to do the things they really want to do. But maybe there's ways to think outside the box. If the core value is trying to give our body what it needs for its optimal health and well-being, maybe there's chair exercises or something else we can do. I know I'm picking a simple example, but the idea is trying to think, if we can, as creatively as we can, problem solving, talking with other people who have experienced similar barriers or difficulties. Maybe they have ideas. We are in a position here as a community. You are all potentially your greatest resources of connecting. So the important thing, one of the most important things, is support. So I just want to review the social buffering theory really quickly. It's a theory that I read about in grad school, and I think it was developed way back in the 70s. And it's this idea that with enough social support, the effects of stressors in our lives, even trauma-level stressors, we can cope better with those effects if we have enough support. And it also holds that if we have day-to-day what may seem like minor stressors, but they're persisting day after day after day, without support even for those, that can have negative effects. So having support is actually quite critical because we are social creatures, and it means it inherently is going to feel good and healing to feel heard and understood. So the type of support matters. A lot of people will think they're giving support to somebody by giving advice or ideas. And a lot of times what we really need, again, we're talking about honoring the emotional world, which has been neglected by our society, and it affects our health when our emotional world is neglected. So the type of support I'm saying that would probably feel most helpful in helping validate our pain is to have us feel less lonely with it is so important. So seeking out emotional support, and you can set the frame. You can tell the person you're going to be sharing with, if you feel that person is a kind of a trusted person, to say, what I need right now is to just share what I'm feeling in my emotional world. And what I'd really like from you is for you to just be with me and to somehow show if you care about that. That's what's going to help. Any ideas or advice I don't need right now. We can help our listeners to know what, because they're just trying to be helpful when they give the advice, because they're feeling helplessness, like, you're upset, that matters to me, and I don't want to feel my distress, so I'm going to try to fix it. It's a form of avoidance in a way. The giving advice, or, oh my goodness, the times when people say just get over it, that's because they're engaging in avoidance. They don't want to feel their own discomfort, but it's because they actually care about you, and they don't want you to be feeling upset. So we need to, as a society and a culture, we really would be great if we could stop asking people what's wrong when we notice a sad or distressed expression, because that's feeding that idea that somehow it's not okay to feel what we feel, and instead ask, what are you feeling? I want to be here with you. I don't want you to be alone with that. What are you feeling? Not what's wrong. Okay. So social support and connectedness is so, so important. And seeking out that support and having compassion for our emotional world. And whatever we can do to cry when we need to cry, to laugh in the moments of joy, all of that mix, and to be open and authentic from our core is what's going to feel like we're living healthier in our journey. And I'm not sure, but I think FFB is probably an amazing resource that maybe there's ways they can be an infrastructure or help with developing ways for people to connect like we are right now. This is amazing. Look at this community of all of you coming together today. I would hope people problem solve or think about and brainstorm ways to still stay connected or find ways to do that either in your local state level or national. Who knows what can open up. But what I'd like to do now is just end, if it's okay, with a loving kindness, compassion-based meditation, because research has shown that 2 particular types of meditation tend to be really helpful for grounding and centering us. And it's when we kind of contemplate things we're grateful for, and compassion. When we invite in compassion for ourselves, others, or the world, something about that tends to help people feel a little more centered with your core. So if it's okay, I'd like to end with sort of a guided mindfulness exercise of a kind of a loving kindness and compassion. And then we're gonna open it up for questions and comments. Okay. So I use this in groups and a lot of my individual sessions. And I use these ting shas, which I think are sold at a lot of mindfulness or like Tibetan type shops. And it's an unusual sound that we don't hear every day. And I've become conditioned to associate it with trying to come into the moment, just the sound of it. So I'm going to ring these chimes just 3 times. And then I'm going to start the guided meditation. But I'd like to invite you first, if you can make sure you're sitting in a position that feels comfortable but alert, whatever that is for you. And if taking in deep breaths is kind of centering for you, maybe do that. Just take in a slow, deep breath. Let it out slowly. Or some other centering exercise that works for you. And just be in this moment. And just notice that through these efforts of FFB, we are all here together as community, and you are a part of this, and we are with you. And I'm going to ring these chimes 3 times, and then I just want you to experience the words as I say them. May I be well. May you be well. May all beings be well. May I have peace and serenity. May you have peace and serenity. May all beings have peace and serenity. May I have compassion for the suffering of others. May you have compassion for the suffering of others. May all beings have compassion for the suffering of others. May I have compassion for myself. May you have compassion for yourself. May all beings have compassion for themselves. May I stand with dignity in the face of life's adversities. May you stand with dignity in the face of life's adversities. May all beings stand with dignity in the face of life's adversities. And now taking in a slow, deep breath and letting it out slowly. You matter. Your emotions matter. What you hold dear matters. And who and what you want to be matters. Thank you so much for being here with us today. So now I think we're opening it up to questions and comments.
Ms. Katie.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Wagner. That was an amazing presentation. And Eric, excellent job with the moderating. Thank you. We are now going to take questions. You can submit your questions through the Q&A feature in Zoom. We have over 150 participants in today, and there are many questions. So we will be answering as many of those live as we can, but we will make sure to try and answer them offline as well. If you send questions that aren't answered today to info@fightingblindness.org. So I'll start with some of the questions that we have been getting. A few of them are all about resources, specifically asking if you're taking clients, Dr. Wagner, and if not, how does someone go about finding someone locally that either specializes in vision loss or is themselves affected with vision loss?
So that's where I would contact your state services for the blind and visually impaired. They may very well know of resources. If you have insurance, asking the clinic wherever you go to their mental health department to ask if anybody there. Many clinics, like I only work here, most of my career has been in the VA system, which is a very different medical system. And we have, I often get a lot of the referrals for veterans from other teams because they know I understand. So I've worked with many people with low vision, but I don't take any referrals outside of the VA because I don't work in private practice. When I retire in 7.5 years.
And 6 months.
Yeah. I certainly hope to go to work private practice then. But I do think we have a rehab psychology kind of department, and a lot of those folks help with people with adjusting to whether it's physical changes in the body, it's rehab medicine, as well as low vision. So checking in with your local clinics if they happen to have like rehab type psychologists. But I know that there are many organizations that naturally include counseling for vision loss. When I went through 2 weeks of rehab when I was a graduate student. I had kind of been too busy to do learning the skills of how to function as a person with visual impairment. So when I was at grad school in South Dakota, I connected with their state services for the blind and visually impaired and went through 2 weeks of intensive rehab blindfolded. And they had counseling support. It's part of what they offered. And then they had ongoing, I was assigned a case manager who was there to talk to for my whole time I was there as a grad student. So I'd like to believe, I don't know if there's been funding cuts, but I hope most states would have resources like that. So I would encourage you to check there. County social services sometimes know of pockets of resources. And I wish I knew more, but good luck.
Thank you. So similar related to resources and maybe some tactics that you might offer for some specific situations that were mentioned. One person had written in asking for any tools for gaining motivation to learn technology that might be either helpful now or would be helpful in the future. So I guess that's the first one. And another one was any for tools to help gain confidence for traveling on their own, since they mentioned that they were a widow who didn't have a travel partner.
Yeah, this is one of the areas where I myself, when I went through the rehab, and again, State Service for the Blind is free, and they have programs to teach you. I was taught cane navigation and trying to orient me to how streets worked. But I only had 2 weeks break. Normally it's a month program. So they pushed as much as they could in those 2 weeks, but I didn't learn those skills. I'm also a bit dyslexic with right and left and directions, as Eric knows. He often says your other left, Anne, but we have met people who have been through programs like Blind Incorporated here in Minneapolis. Oh my gosh, they're amazing. They know how to use those iPhones and those technologies, and there are scholarships so you don't have to pay. And some are housed here, and they take referrals from all over the country. And there may be scholarships. So we met people that actually came to our church that had been housed there. There was apartments because they were not from Minnesota, and they were learning all this ways of using their phone, and they were navigating on their own. They were given assignments of how to get from point A to point B using the bus system, and they're taught the skills for how to do that. So I would just check and Google low vision resources. Ask about at low vision stores. They often know of those types of programs. There are many here in Minneapolis. I think there's a place called Low Vision Resources. They may even have like support groups that they're aware of. So I think just doing some search, and if you're somebody who currently doesn't even have the tech abilities to do that, boy, hopefully you have a friend or somebody who does know who can help with that search, or at least calling directory assistance for your State Services for the Blind might be a place to start.
Thank you. There was a couple questions that came in related to being a parent who has vision loss. So one was specifically asking about resources. Another one was talking about the guilt that they're feeling about possibly about being recently diagnosed and not knowing if they've passed things down to the children that they have. So from the parent with vision loss to point of view, is any information you want to share? Yes.
Okay, so this is going to be mainly from my own personal experience with my mom. She died 3 years ago, and I miss her every day, so I'm sorry if I get choked up, but she was 16 when she met the Standards for Legal Blindness, and she was kind of the feisty personality, the most non-judgmental person I've ever met. And she was an incredible role model for me, and she had 5 children, and 4 of us had RP, and it never, for whatever reason, it never occurred to her to feel guilty about that until she went through some rehab through State Services, and one of the counselors there probably innocently just wanted to check in. Do you feel guilty at all for having 4 children with RP? Probably that was the intention, but mom, it had never occurred to her. So she came home in tears, and she had us do a family meeting, and I was little, I was probably like 8 or something at that point. And she asked if any of us regretted being alive because of the RP. And we're all like, what? No, no. And she's like, okay, good. So I share that for the person who's wondering about feeling guilty. There are so many adversities that can happen in life, regardless of whether somebody has RP or not. And as I've said, there's a mix, that there are many things that are that the blindness has brought to my life that are moments of incredible humor. And I'm not saying that I'm grateful for having RP, but there are moments that I am. And I don't for one bit ever regret being alive. So if you're a parent, I would just encourage you to know that the guilt showing up is actually just trying to tell you what a great parent you are, that you want the best for your children, and you want them to have full, fulfilling lives as they're able, and you are already in a position to be the support they need. You're going to hear their emotions. You're going to let them know, yep, we can't control that, but what can we control? Well, how do you want to be right now? What can we try to problem solve to have your wants and needs met, and to work on accepting the disappointment if there isn't an answer? You are still intact and you are loved. So the guilt is just trying to tell you that you want the best, but please don't judge the RP. It's not something you have control for, and you get to be a parent. As far as the resources for a parent with vision loss, again, state services for the blind, again, the rehab, the people who actually help with those skills probably have ideas. I'm not sure how my mom figured it out, because she's blind and she raised 5 kids on the farm, and worked side by side my dad out on the farm doing chores outside and inside, and taught us all to do that too. But she had worked at it was a toilet paper factory, and she got a job there after my dad had to sell the cows because small farms just weren't able to make it. And it was meant for people, most people there were blind, and it was structured so they could work and have a really good salary until it closed because they weren't getting enough federal funding and grants, which is very sad. So then she decided, what am I good at? And she said, she realized she's good at raising kids. And by then, many of her children were having babies of their own, and we needed a daycare in our small rural town. So she became licensed, fully approved, passed all the licensing, even though she's blind. And she started taking care of other children's babies and kids. So there are resources, there are ways to figure it out. She had the kids wearing little bell bracelets so she could hear where they were.
I should try that.
I think we all had little bells on our little shoes when we were little, before we could learn to speak, to let her know. We learned habits of whistling and talking so people could know where we are. And again, I think you are all each other's greatest resources. If you can connect in some way, in some sort of a support group where you can talk about your fears and your emotions, and again, validate that they're saying you care very much about providing and wanting the best for your children. But there may be other like creative ideas like that, like my mom came up with.
Tom points out that your county social services is a source to get referral to a source of aid.
Yes, and I think I mentioned that. Yeah, county social services. And I know like even our local Northern Lights chapter often share ideas. So your FFB local chapters may be able to start chat groups or frequently asked questions or things like that. But county social services, absolutely. Lutheran Social Services does an amazing job with like parenting skills, and maybe they have some that are specializing in issues related to vision loss, or might be able to help problem solve. Okay.
Okay, so we have a question that came in, and it's a long question, so I'm going to read it. It's not something I can really paraphrase. It says, I've been with my fiance for many years since we were teenagers. He has RP and has always avoided the grief of losing his vision. He feels cheated in life and seems so resentful. Many times we've argued about the balance of his independence and my helping. I just want to make his life easier, and I know it can be unhealthy, so I try to take on his struggles. And it says that he struggles with the dynamics that aren't often like others, and wanting to be the, quote, man he wants to be because of his vision loss. How can I support him properly? What role can I play?
Wow. I think my sister-in-law would say something very similar. The men in my family, unfortunately, my grandpa and my brothers and my uncles who had RP had already absorbed some of the societal programming about what it means to be a man, and that stoic, you're supposed to be tough, the protector. And all of those judgments have done a great deal of damage. None of them will use a white cane or go through rehab. All the women with RP in my family were fine with asking for help and using the white canes. So he is struggling with societal messages and programming, which right now he's not aware of, are just judgments and words and language that he's internalized and isn't aware they're not truth. And he is suppressing his grief. He's doing that avoidance thing. And resentment and bitterness, by the way, some interesting education about resentment, bitterness, and righteousness. Those emotions are actually not natural. We're not born with that capacity. They come only from judgments. They come from language, and they team up with anger, which is also, as we've talked about earlier, anger functions as an avoidance of the real core emotions, which is hurt and helplessness and the grief and loss of these changes. He didn't ask for this, and until he can work on acceptance and that beginner's mind of what is, and how do I want to be? How do I want to use my energy today to be the person I want to be? And to realize that all of our strength comes from that when we connect with our core. This isn't a matter of, we know there's no such thing as being weak because you have blindness. So the answer of how do you, I've tried to talk to my brothers about the programming, and if they went for rehab and learned to use the cane, maybe they wouldn't run into things so much, but they're like, it's their choice. I guess it's their sense of agency that they're saying, nope, would rather run into somebody and let people wonder why I'm holding on to my wife's shoulder, and the ways they are when they're not being independent. So that's such a good question, and you're trying to balance your own values and boundaries. So many of us have heard of this term enabling, when we know that what somebody's doing may not be the healthiest, and because we care, we step in. So I use a metaphor of, it's kind of like somebody's holding a burning log. That's their issues that only they can see and work through and heal, and we have our own. And when we try to reach in to help somebody with their burning log, what usually happens? We get burned. It's not really helping resolve anything. So all you can do, the person who typed that in, is to love your fiance and to let him know you want to support his emotions when he's able to share them at that core level, that you suspect the anger and resentment are functioning as an avoidance, and that you absolutely believe there's nothing about this that's about strength or weakness, and nothing can take away who he is as a man. But to claim his life, he's going to have to find a way to validate the hurt and grief and start to claim, how does he want to be today? And the person who wrote that comment, for you to look at, what is your balance? What is it you approve of doing? And you get to honor your own self-care. And it's okay for you to say, if it's something you think he can do independently, to say, I have these other things I wanted to do today, and so I approve of the choice. I'm going to do those. And you may feel disappointed, and that's your emotion, but I still love you. I mean, these are it's a complex situation, and I'm just trying to validate that you have a right to honor your own self-care and boundaries, and to set some limits if they don't feel healthy for you. And if there's resources you can find for him, if you contact county social services or rehab, and find out if they feel supportive and caring, and all you can do is suggest, I wonder if this would help us or help you. Yeah. So those are just some thoughts off the top of my head.
Thank you. I think we have one live question that came in. So I think we're opening up the line to Jim Turner. Is the name on the list if you had a question? Jim, are you there? Oh, there.
Yeah, I don't have a question.
Oh,
Did I do something to make you think that?
You raised your hand, sir, so it's okay. You don't have
hi,
to.
Jim.
I can't see my screen, so I don't
Okay.
know what's on my screen.
Well, it's nice to hear your voice, Jim, anyway.
Well, I've enjoyed this session. I really have. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we can go back to some of the written in questions that people have still been sending. Someone asked a question about if you guys have a podcast. They've really liked hearing from you, and if you do any of these on a more regular basis.
We don't, really? You think that would be good? We don't, but.
That's what I need now, is to get back into radio.
Yeah,
Excellent.
thank you. Thank you.
No, it's actually, that's a high compliment. Thank you very much.
It is. Thank you.
Someone submitted a question about having, with different areas that their stress and their feelings might be coming from, whether it's their own feelings with PTSD or being the helper. How do they identify where that stress or where those feelings are coming from to best know how to handle those?
Oh, such a good question. As much as you can, when you're noticing a strong emotional experience, just pausing to checking in the present moment, the actual situation happening, what you think at your core might seem to fit that. What emotions, knowing yourself and your values, which ones seem to fit the present, and anything that seems to be not quite fitting or out of proportion is probably something from deep pain from the past. And a lot of times what's actually showing up is the past. It really is. We have old hurts that maybe have never been processed and integrated. And so they show up with subtle kind of triggers in the present. Even if you're not able to figure out exactly what it is, it's healing to be able to share with yourself, even if nobody else is around, to connect to that pain as if it's like a hurt child. How would you be to a hurt, scared child? You would be offering comfort. So even if you're not sure, it's absolutely okay to say, you know what, pain, wherever you're coming from, you're valid. Something was important to you back then, and something hurtful happened. So I'm just going to be with you for a moment. I'm certainly not going to suppress and reject you. And I'm going to try to ground myself in this moment for what I value doing in this present moment. So, but as much as we can, trying to open up that emotional world, and chances are over time, the more you try to visit it, comfort it when it shows up, you might get a sense more and more, how old does that pain feel? Often that's something in my work, I'll be asking people that I'm working with, of how old does that feel? Does it feel like it's a child age or a teen self? Is there a memory that comes to mind if you pause and link? And the memories often show up, and that's exactly in the moment what needed to come up to feel heard and seen and cared about. And if you can share that process with somebody you trust who can offer that emotional support, and you've helped set the frame, I don't want advice, I don't want anything about taking it away. I just want to know you're here with me and that you care about what I'm feeling. Those are kind of the important things for healing, and it can heal. It's never too late for healing. So trying to just check in with your core as much as you can. It's kind of like you're inviting these defenses to just kind of step aside, that you are ready, able, and willing to honor your core truths. So yeah, that's what I can think of to say. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for that. I think we have just one more question that seems a little bit more on the personal question for you that came in. But they were asking about, in obtaining your advanced degrees, what challenges or what were your experiences like going through and doing that?
Yeah, so because I knew that my vision was declining, as I said, I met the standards when I was 17. My acuity, so I met it because of the tunnel vision. So I had less than 10 degrees central vision at that point. But the acuity I still had was pretty good, with as long as I had adequate light and boldness. So I realized when I graduated high school, I had no time to lose. I better move forward with my education, because back then, I mean, I'm pretty old. Eric says I don't look it, but it was a while ago that I went through grad school and undergrad. I just focused on schooling. I didn't have hardly anything else in my life. I didn't even start to really date until, past many of my peers when there, because I was focusing on school, because I didn't want to delay. Like, what if I had balanced and I decided to take a part-time load or something, and it would add years to my education? I couldn't do that. So I got my undergrad in 4 years, and then I got a 2-year master's degree in clinical psych. At that point, I didn't know enough about the PhD level. I regret that I hadn't been more informed to know I could have gone straight into a PhD program from my 4-year undergrad. So I did a 2-year kind of what's called terminal clinical psych master's degree. And at that point, I realized I did not yet have enough training to do what I really want, which is this therapy. I really wanted to help people with recovery. So then I joined, or I went for my PhD. So it ended up being 10 years after high school of education. And by the end, I was still able to see pen. I was needing a CCTV, by the end there, or I'd get incredible headaches and eye strain, but I was still able to use my eyes to get through it. Nowadays, there's my nieces, who both inherited the IRP from their dad. State Services for the Blind are helping them. They've got them the cool iPads and the training and the cane training, and they're getting, I think they got them computers too. I'm not sure, for college. So they're getting a lot of support to go through college with the tech support and training through State Services for the Blind. So, but my story is, I was racing the clock, trying so hard to get through. So I went, because at that point there wasn't much technology for me. I didn't know how I'd do it without my eyes. So.
Brent says 30s is not that old.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
And he says that if we, that he thinks we ought to do YouTube videos, but make sure that we have a dog or a cat in the background.
Oh, we'd have our dog Bandit. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. We just hit 3 o'clock Eastern time, so that's the end of today's session. I want to thank you both so much. This was amazing, and judging by the comments, so helpful for so many people. And hopefully we'll get you guys back again at a future session.
Absolutely.
Love it.
Love it.
So this was our final Living and Thriving session for Visions. We do have our closing session returning today at 4:30 p.m. Eastern time. You should have gotten a link to that in your email, and you'll get the reminder of that in about half an hour. But you can please join us for that session and close out Visions with us. We do appreciate everyone being here today and all these great questions.
Can I say one more thing?
Of course.
If anybody's interested in my detailed notes for the presentation for the educational stuff, it's not like a fancy handout, but I am willing to send those to Michelle, and she can get them to anybody who would like them. And they said they could probably post them with the actual video that they're recording. So if any of you who've listened today would like them, I'm going to send them on. They're not really fancy or really well organized, but they are more of what I said. So
Amazing. Thank you so much for doing that.
Okay.
And if anyone has additional questions or would like copies of those notes, you can always email us at info@fightingblindness.org. And on behalf of all of us at the Foundation, thank you so much for joining and have a great rest of your day until we meet again at 4:30. Thanks.